Hey guys, I have been thinking about a couple of things recently, with modding and rigging things, and there have been a lot of people who've been asking me about how to actually rig things like helmets and vests. And I know there's a helmet tutorial out there, but that's about it, and it doesn't cover absolutely everything that I would personally want to know if I'm making something like a helmet. So I figured I would do something a little bit different today and make a tutorial video on how to rig helmets, vests, how to put them into Infusion with a collider, how to set up armor values on them, how to make it so you can actually pick them up and interact with them, and how you can put them inside of faction boxes. So if you were to publish a gear mod, people can go into their server, just throw like a Soviet or an American box on the ground, and your objects will be in there and ready to use right away. For the tutorial, you're gonna need a few things. Actually, you're gonna need 5 things to be exact. You're gonna need a vest model, obviously, a helmet model, obviously, and then you're gonna need 3 templates from Bohemia. They're not exactly the easiest to find, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna grab those files and put them into something like a OneDrive folder, so you can go in there and just grab those. But the 3 templates you're gonna need are a root skeleton, a weight template, and then a helmet sample. I'm gonna explain a little bit what those are, but for the vest and the helmet, those are going to be links on Sketchfab. I figured if I just grab free publicly available models, it's easier to follow along than if I use like one of my own models, because things will look different. And if you're weight painting, to make sure that like rigging or animation works properly, it's going to be wildly different if I'm showing off something that you don't have access to. Once you have finished downloading everything that's in the description, we're going to start off by creating a helmet first. I figure the helmet is the easiest place to start off, and this isn't a tutorial on Blender necessarily, so I'm not going to show you how to model things or how to like change a lot about something, but I'm going to show you how to scale things, get the weights on, rig it, export it. So the essentials if you're someone who's not into modeling but you would like to have your own custom armor in some way, that's what we're going to be covering. So we're going to start off by inserting the helmet sample. So I'm just on another monitor here. I'm just going to drag it in. Make sure your animation is turned off. It's going to be turned on by default. Just turn it off. Import FBX. And for those of you who are familiar with ARMA 3, you'll see that's a helmet from it. And it's still very relevant. It's very good for transferring weights to the helmet so that you can rig it to a new skeleton in Reforger. So when we have it in here, if we click on the helmet here, you'll see that there's a list of vertex groups, and those are the weights. So if you are in ARMA Reforger and you turn your head, for example, the helmet will know to follow those bones, but the weight on it is going to determine how drastically it moves with those bones. And you can see how strong the weight is by going into the top left corner where it says object mode, and you can just go into weight painting, and you can see that the object that you're looking at has now changed colors. Blue means it's not going to be affected by the bone, whereas something like, if we can find it, red right here, means it's going to be very affected, because obviously the head bone, when it's turning, you want the helmet to turn with it, and that's what it's doing right here. And then we have jaws down here. There's some funny things with helmets. If you are rigging something that has like a gas mask on it, sometimes the weight doesn't take properly. So I have found if you just paint the whole thing red, it works pretty well. This video is not necessarily on best practices, but it's based off of what works for me. And sometimes if I look at the head and I just start clicking everywhere, you can see I can start painting it. That works just fine. In a lot of cases. If you realize that there are certain areas on your helmet or even on your vest that are moving when they shouldn't be moving, let's say your character, he swings his right arm up to run, and you notice like something on the helmet to the right side here just like flies out with the arm, that means for whatever reason, the right arm bone or something like their forearm has been weight painted with the helmet here. So if you look through the vertex groups and you see something like that, you see like right arm, or maybe let's say right shoulder in this case. If it's red like this and your character moves their right shoulder outwards, that helmet right there is going to move out with it. So it's kind of something to be aware of. If you can't figure out why your model looks so weird when you're importing it, it's because it might be weight painted too much or it might not be weight painted enough. There's no real tutorial, in my opinion, on how I can show that off, because different models will make it different for everyone, and everyone's going to have a little bit of preference on how much movement they want in their gear. So just be aware of that. If you need to get rid of it, like right here, this is going to definitely cause us issues later when we start weight painting things. You can hold down Control and click, and it just erases everything like that. What we're going to do now is we're going to grab our helmet that we've downloaded. It's just a construction helmet. It is nothing special at all. But I figured the most simple helmet would be good for the tutorial here. So I'm just going to drag the helmet in. And the helmet's pretty large. For the sake of ease, we're going to just remove the strap on it. So I selected it, press delete. We're going to select the helmet. And we can click on the arrows and drag it up and down like this, and we can go to the left-hand side here to change the scale and everything. But a couple easier ways is if you press S on your keyboard, you can scale your helmet up and down like this. If you press G, it'll move it around. If you brought it to the wrong place, like right here, for example, you can right-click, and it'll go back to position. But if you press G and then something like Z, you can go up and down on the Z axis. So we're going to drag it up here. And we can actually see that it's not quite level because these bones here are where the character's face will be. So you can just drag it over. And you just want to make sure it lines up as well as it possibly can, so that when your character wears it, it's not going to look super funny. So that's pretty close. What we're going to do now is we're going to select the head sample, like right here. We're gonna hold shift and we're gonna click the helmet. So now we have both selected. What we now want to do is go to the left hand side up in the top, go to weight paint. We're gonna click on weights. We're going to click transfer weights, and then you'll notice nothing really happened, but this little box down here popped up where it says transfer mesh data. You're going to click on the arrow, and you're going to see this option here where it says source layer. And instead of active layer, you're going to call it by name, and then you can just kind of click off the screen somewhere. If you go back into object mode and click on the construction helmet, you can now see that there are 3 vertex groups on it. We didn't have that before. But what we've done is, since we selected that helmet, which had the weights, and then selected this guy right here, we're moving the weights from one place to another. So to make sure it worked, we can go to weight paint and we can click through, and you can see right here, it's completely red now. So it knows when your character turns their head that this will turn with it. Now that you have the helmet weight painted, a really cool thing about this is if you can get it working into ARMA, you can use this helmet as the new template moving forward. You don't need to bring in this whole skeleton every time. You know that if the weights up here are good on your helmet, every time you bring in a new helmet and you get the scale perfect, you can just transfer weights from this helmet to everything moving forward. So it actually gets much easier once you have the first successfully weight painted object. What we're gonna do with this guy is we're gonna now just delete the sample helmet. So I just have to go up here and delete it. You'll notice when you start deleting things, sometimes nested objects start to pop up. So just delete everything. And you're going to want to keep the P-Sphere 1 because that's the helmet. If you want to rename it, because, you know, it could get confusing, you can just double click it and call it something like construction helm. Like that. And you'll see the weights are still on it because those weights are not dependent on the sample. They're a part of this object now permanently. The next thing we want to do now is we want to insert the new scale file that's in the OneDrive. So we're going to drag new scale in. Now that your new scale is in, you'll see this fine gentleman right here. You can actually see a very rough layout of what the head will look like. Like, you can kind of see that's the mouth, that's the chin, they have the nose, that's the eye, that's probably the back of the head and the neck. So right now, the helmet looks very close to where it needs to be. It looks like it might actually be a little too wide around the side here. So what we can do is go into scale, and you'll see if we select it, whoops, there's the red bar there. We can just kind of squish it in a little bit if we need to. We'll see how that works. You don't really need to do anything too much with the skeleton here. All that we're taking is the root from it, because this is what's going to determine whether the helmet can actually be worn or not. So we don't actually need to touch it at all. We can click on our helmet. We can click on the little modifier option to the right hand side, the little wrench. Click add modifier, click search, and then make sure you select armature, select object, click armature. That's it. Your helmet is now theoretically completely rigged. When you put it into Infusion, it's going to work. Before we do that, we're going to set up the helmet for things like painting. We're going to get a collider set up, and we're also going to create a floor version of the helmet. Because when you drop the helmet in Infusion, this is the object, right? It knows it's this high up. It's about 6 feet high up. So when you drop it, it'll be floating almost at perfect head height. So we're going to need to make a version that's down on the ground so you can pick it up. And that is so easy to do. What we're going to do first is just make sure we have materials set up. So if we click on materials, we can see that we have a material. Most models, if you're downloading them, should have a material on them. I would recommend renaming them, just so when you're inserting them, you're not potentially inserting objects with the exact same material name, which is very possible. It's not really going to hurt anything, but it might get confusing when the texture looks completely broken because it's just copying a material from a completely different object in ARMA that has the exact same name. So always just make sure you're renaming everything. So we're going to call it just like Conhelm Mat or something like that. Perfect. Now, construction helmets are by no means bulletproof, but I might as well show you what it looks like if you want to make it kind of bulletproof. So we're going to highlight it up here. We're going to Control C and then Control V. We're going to delete the armature on it there. We're going to leave the ending position, but we don't need 2 armatures. We only need 1. We're going to select the new helmet, and we're actually going to just remove the material on it. Sometimes if you put it into something like Substance Painter, it gets a little bit confused because it doesn't quite know what you're trying to do. We're now going to double click it. And at the start of the name, we're going to type in UTM underscore and hit enter. UTM is just a way for Infusion to determine or to find out if an object has a collider on it or not. There's a couple of different versions. There's like a sill underscore, like a square underscore. There's a bunch of other ones. I've been using Infusion for a few months now, and I've made lots of objects. I have only ever used UTM because it gives you, I believe it's more advanced colliders. So if you're using something with like multiple triangles and vertices and things, UTM is what you typically should always be using. There's other scenarios where if you're making a big cylinder object, you would use the sill collider. But for the sake of this tutorial, we're not going to mess with any of that. We're going to leave it as UTM. Now that we have this ready, we can export it. So we're going to go into the file in the top left-hand corner. We're going to go to export, and we're going to choose the FBX. Now that we're in here, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put everything onto like my desktop, just to make things just a little bit more simple for me, just for the video sake, but put it into like your project folder or something like that. I'm going to select the file. This is actually just the folder I put in here for the helmet for the tutorial. What you want to do before you hit export on anything is you're going to want to select custom properties in the object types, and you're going to scroll down to where you can see armature, and then you're going to turn off add leaf bones. And then we're going to call it something like construction helm. And then we will export it. Awesome. Now, in Blender, we're going to export the floor version. So we don't really need a collider on the floor version. It doesn't really matter. So, I mean, if you want a collider, you can put it on, but I'm going to actually just remove the collider in this case. We're going to grab the helmet. We're going to drag it down to the floor, roughly where his feet are kind of, because this will almost be perfect where the floor is. And then we're going to export this guy. Now the difference here is obviously you want to change the name to something like construction helm floor. And then because we only want the helmet, we don't want the whole armature with it, we only want the helmet. We're going to choose on the right hand side where it says limit to, we're going to choose selected objects because that's the only thing we have selected right now. So I'm going to click on export FBX right there. And now we have a floor version of the helmet. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to jump into Infusion, and we're going to see if everything worked. So now that we're in Fusion here, I want to show off just quickly how to make a quick test world, because I've just realized that maybe people watching this have never even been in Infusion yet. Because you can make the armor and you can put it in your faction boxes, you can make it wearable without ever going into a world, but you have no way of knowing if the helmet is positioned correctly. For example, the skeletons I'm using might have been backwards. So if it is, and our character puts it on, the helmet will be reversed, and we can just go into Blender and just flip it around, and then we're good to go. So just make a world, and I'll show you how to do that right now. This is what it's going to look like when you open up Infusion for the first time. You're going to click on World Editor, like this. We're going to click Save, and then we're going to throw it into the name of our project. So right here, I have Tutorial World. I'm going to create a new folder and just call it like Test Worlds or something like that. Hit OK, and then we're going to call the file, in this case, we'll call it, oh my gosh, Testing World. So now we have the world saved. You now want to go to the lower left-hand side where it says Create. You're going to type in the word terrain, and you're going to drag a generic terrain entity. Now, you're going to right-click the terrain, and you're going to go all the way down to where it says Create New Terrain. And if you're making a larger project, you're going to mess with these right here, but since we're literally just using this for testing objects, it does not need to be something big. So we're going to Create, click on Create, and now we have our terrain. Best practice when you create a terrain is to go to the right-hand side where you see Transform, where the coordinates are, and you're just going to make everything 0, like that. So now our terrain is zeroed. Now, we're going to go into our tutorial world, and we're going to create, let's just say a clothing folder. We're going to go in here, and now we're going to drag the helmet FBX that we've now exported directly into this folder right here. When you throw it in here, it'll give you this little question asking to register. That's because whenever you add new objects or anything into Infusion, it needs to be registered, because what it does is it'll convert certain files to versions to make Infusion actually able to read it. So for this, we want it to be a model because we're not animating anything. And we're going to mark the same for all FBX files, just for this case, just to make it easier for us, so we don't get this window every time we bring something up. And we're gonna click as model, and now we have our helmet right here. You'll see a data folder gets created, and that's because materials are stored in there, so this is the material for the helmet. We're gonna navigate back, and then we're also going to drag our construction helm floor model in like that. Perfect. You will notice that a second window popped up right there, and that's just because whenever you drag a new object in, it'll sometimes ask you. If we run into issues and we have to update this construction helmet, because we've checked off that we want it to be for all FBX files, if we need to drag and drop another updated version into it, it'll know just to replace it. As long as you don't change the name of it at all, Infusion will find it and it'll replace it for you. What we need to do now is actually connect it to a helmet. So the easiest way to do this is just to replace a helmet that already exists. There are ways where we could do it from scratch, but if you don't have to do it from scratch, why would you do it from scratch? So we're going to type in helmet in the resource browser here. We're going to go to ARMA Reforger, and you should see the M1 helmet pop up right here. So we're just going to click it, drag it in. I'm going to double click it in the hierarchy here so we can get a good look of it. Before we do anything, we want to break the prefab of this object. A prefab is just like a saved version of something. So if you're editing the model itself, sometimes it can override on the prefab and it can actually cause issues for some of your stuff in the future. So we're always just gonna kill the prefab and we're gonna start from scratch, essentially, using air quotations. To do that, you just right click the object and you break its prefab instance. And if before I click it, look on the left-hand side where it says Helmet M1. It has that blue cube. When I break the prefab instance, it turns red and it tells you it's just a game entity now because it's not saved to anything. What we can do when we have it selected is you can hit F2, or you can right-click it, double-click it, whatever, to get this rename entity option up on your screen. And we're going to call it just Con Helm or something like that. We'll hit OK. We're going to clear the resource browser. We're going to jump back into our tutorial world folder. We're going to go to clothing, and we're going to look at our construction helmet here. What we need to do is we need to make sure the bones are actually working, because if I drag it into this helmet and I replace it, it is not going to work at all. So to do that, we're going to double click the helmet, and it's going to open up the prefab editor, and you'll see on the right hand side it says 0 plus 0 for bones. And that's because we never told it to import those bones with it for Infusion to read it. So we're going to go to import settings. We're going to go to this box where it says export skinning. We're going to hit the check mark like that. And then we're going to re-import the resource. Now when we go back, we can see that it says 1 plus 229. This is extremely important because you need your bones to equal 230. It was a little bit different before. I believe it was 160. It's 230 now because Bohemia has added like facial bones. So you need to make sure that's what it is. The number on the left-hand side doesn't matter too much, but it needs to always be above 0. For a helmet, typically it's only ever going to say 1. If you have a helmet with something like a face mask attached to it, or like a chin strap, you might see 2 or 3 in this box right here. But as long as it always says 1 and then added with the 1 on the right hand side to 230, you're good to go. So we know right now the helmet is essentially correctly rigged. So now that we have that, we can hit the X to close that little prefab window, and we can navigate back to our world. And now that we have it right here, we're gonna go into our base loadout cloth component, because this is where we're going to make some adjustments as to how the helmet's gonna look. So the helmet that we want to wear is going to go into the worn model, obviously. And then the item model is going to be the floor model. And you'll see right there, it just changed for us. Perfect. What we can now do is put something like an armor value onto it. So because we're already using a helmet with an armor value, there's the armor damage manager component right here. And we have the collider name like this. So what we can do is we can hit the remove element and we can create a brand new one if we want to. And you'll see it just popped up the M1 helmet again. And that's because I just realized I forgot to change the object right here to this helmet like that. So if I go back, there we go. It's updated to construction helm 001. We have everything selected in here. We can leave it as it is. Obviously, the construction helmet's not going to be as strong as the American helmet, but for the sake of the tutorial, we're just going to leave it as it is. What I like to do now is in the clothing folder, I like to create a new folder called something like saved clothing, because you're going to want to save a prefab of everything that you are creating. I don't like to throw it in with these objects because it can get a little bit messy. So we're going to save clothing. And we're going to drag and drop the construction helmet in here and click OK. And now we're actually going to delete the one in the world because you can't interact or pick up generic game entities. It needs to be a prefab or else it won't work. So we're going to drag the helmet in like that. And we have the helmet object. If you want to add like a generic material onto it, you can do that by just going into data, clicking on the helmet here, and we have our sphere. We're gonna go to the BCR map, and we can just add something like metal to it. If you have your own texture, obviously you can just drag it in there and use it yourself. But for the sake of ease, we're just gonna throw a generic metal entity on it. We're gonna do Control S to save, and then we're gonna jump back into our world, and you can see there's a relatively low quality metal on it, but that's fine. What we can do now is click play. We've got our character, and you can see now there's options to interact with it. So we're gonna swap our helmet, go into third person, and we're now wearing our helmet. It's working exactly how it should. We can move around and everything, and you'll see we have the helmet right here. You'll notice the name on it is not changed, and I'm gonna fix that right now. We just wanted to make sure it works. If it didn't, we would want to go back into Blender or do whatever we needed to make sure it fit properly. But I would say this actually fits reasonably well. Just kind of doing this randomly. I don't have any script. I'm not really planning anything. I'm just going along with it. So that guy works. We're gonna click on escape to go back into Infusion, and we're gonna go into the inventory item component, and we're gonna go to the name here, and we're gonna call it something like construction helmet. Description, we will get rid of the description, hit enter, and now we have a construction helmet. If you look at the picture and it doesn't look like the new object that you were trying to use, you just need to go into the preview render attributes a little bit down in the page. And you want to make sure that the preview worn model is checked, because that means when this is checked, if you go into your base loadout cloth component, the worn model is what will be previewed in that little square when you're in your inventory. So now we want to click on apply to prefab. And if we jump back in, we have a construction helmet, and it says construction helmet. So now that we have the helmet done, we're gonna move back into Blender, and we're going to rig a very simple vest. All right, so once we're back inside of Blender, rather than importing that helmet sample again or the new skeleton or anything, we're going to insert the character weight template, which will look like this guy right here. So this is a more advanced helmet sample, kind of. With the helmet sample, there were only a few bones on it, so you had like helmet, jawline, neck, and some shoulders. But if we click on this guy here, and we go into his vertex, you can see he has a ton. And this guy here is used for pretty much anything that's not a helmet or like a mask or glasses or goggles or anything. So if you are rigging something like backpacks, pants, jackets, vests, shirts, pouches, anything like that, this is the guy that you can use for it. Again, same thing applies to what I mentioned before, where you want to just go through the weight sometimes, and when you put it into ARMA, certain parts might move when they shouldn't, or things might not move, and that's when you're going to have to go into the weight painter and kind of adjust it yourself right there. For the vest that we're using, it's a very, very, very simple vest, so we probably shouldn't run into that issue, but if we do, I'll walk us through it. So the next thing we need to do now is insert the vest that we got from Sketchfab. All right, so I've got the vest in here, and we can see it's a little bit off, so again, we're just going to want to position it onto our guy so it looks a little bit more natural. I'm not going to worry about making it too perfect just for the sake of, you know, spending too much time on the tutorial here. But I do want to make it look as nice as I can within reason. You will notice I have it kind of floating a little bit on certain bits, and I don't love how it looks, but keep in mind when you're putting on things like jackets and shirts, you don't want it to clip too much. So if someone is running around like as a naked character, the floating will be more obvious. But if you have like a jacket under this, honestly, I think it's best if you do leave a little bit of room for the clothing right there. So I would say this is fine. We're gonna run with this for right now. What we're gonna do before we go into the weight paint is, I just noticed this is 2 objects here. For the sake of ease, we're just gonna make it 1. So we're gonna select the detail here. We're gonna select the vest, and we're gonna do Control J like this. And now it's 1 object. So we've got that guy there. We're gonna go to the skeleton. We're gonna select the vest. And then we're going to go into weight paint. We're going to click on weights, and we are going to transfer weights like we did before. Make sure name is selected. We don't want it to be all there. We want it to be on name. And we're going to just click off. And now, if I click on the vest here, we're weight painted. So, same thing with the helmet. We're going to delete everything that we don't want from this fine man right here. We have our vest. And now we're going to put that new skull back in again. So just like that. And we can actually see it is reversed from the vest here. So I don't know exactly which way is going to be the right way. So we're just going to have to kind of find out. But what we can do is we can actually just flip the skeleton and just see what happens. If it's the wrong way, we can go back. Make sure your entity position is flipped with it as well. It's like a separate object from it right there sometimes. But we've got it here. Select the vest. Go into modifiers. Add modifier. Search. Armature. And make sure your armature is selected. Now, we want to again add the collider to it. So we're going to do Control C, remove that armature, double click, UTM underscore. We're going to make sure there's no material on it there just to confuse us. And now we're basically good to go. So we're going to go back into File, Export, FBX, and we're still in here where we had our construction helmet. The properties are the same from when we exported it last. So the last thing we exported was the floor object of the helmet. So we want to turn off selected objects because we need everything right up here. And we're just going to call it something like tutorial vest. We're going to export that. We're going to delete this. And we are going to create a floor version of it. So my Blender's having some issues right now and it keeps crashing for whatever reason. So if that's happening to you as well, it might be an issue with the vest, or it could just be my Blender right now. You don't really need that project to make the floor version of the vest. You can just reopen the vest itself in an empty version of Blender, and then we can just kind of work on it right here. So I'm just gonna flatten it. That's what I like to do. I like to get the scale and flatten it down like that. And then we're going to, we're gonna rotate it. Let's say to something like 0. And then we're gonna move it kind of back to where this little thing right is here, because that's just letting you know that's like the pivot point. So we're gonna put it right there. We're gonna raise it up so it's not in the ground. And now we have a floor version of it. So we're gonna export it. We're gonna go where we had it in here. We're gonna call it tutorial vest floor. And again, you want to make sure selected objects is on if you're in the other project. If you're doing what I'm doing, just because I was having issues, you don't have to really worry about it because there's nothing that it would interfere with. So we're gonna export it like that. And we're gonna jump back into Infusion now. So now that we're in Fusion here, we're gonna do what we did before. We're gonna drag everything. If you select both of your vests, you can just drag all of them in one go. Select same for all FBX as model, and we have everything in here. And you'll notice the material, whatever it was the same name as something else. So it's actually it's already a black vest there, because there must be something else in Infusion that has the same name as it. That's fine. I'll leave it as it is. It might be different for you, but we can do what we did before, where we throw like a material onto the helmet. We can do that with the vest as well. What we're gonna do is now just click on ARMA Reforger after we type vest in the resource browser. We're gonna go to prefabs. We're gonna see if there's a vest in here we can do. There's also the, I think the 6B that we can try. Yeah, so we can type the 6B too. That would work as well. We'll drag that in there like this. And same with the helmet. We're going to break prefab instance. We're going to jump back into where we have our clothing. We're going to double click the vest. We're going to make sure that we turn on export skinning. Re-import the resource. And we can see right here, it equals 230, 18 plus 212, that's 230. So we know the vest is working. Let's go back into Infusion again. And we're gonna call this guy something like tutorial vest. We have our base loadout cloth component here. We're gonna change the vest to that. We're gonna change the floor to that. Perfect. And we can actually see there is no armor on that 6B2 right there. So we can add component and we can type in the word armor, and we can add the armor damage manager right there. And you'll see there's like a red thing that pops up to let us know that it works. We're going to go to saved clothing and we're going to drag the vest into it like this. We're going to delete the vest and we're going to drop this guy back in. And we're going to load up and see what happens. So we're just going to drop all of this stuff here. And just like that, we have a working vest. You'll see, like I mentioned, it does clip a little bit. So you can go into Infusion and rescale it a little bit to fix it. You don't need to go through the process of re-weighting everything and like rigging anything. If you're making very small adjustments just so it's a little bit more visible, you don't have to go through all that trouble. If I drop my helmet, we can put this guy on here. And we got everything. You'll notice in first person, you can actually see the helmet, which is kind of weird. In third person, it's not noticeable at all. But in first person, it's kind of weird. So to fix that, we're going to leave the editor. We're going to go back into data. And we need to go into the material where the helmet was. I'm kind of glad that showed up because I was honestly going to forget about it. Right click the helmet, or the material, sorry. Go all the way down to where we see in general, there's allow user alpha bias and disable user alpha. Check both of those off. save it, go back, load up Infusion, and then wear the helmet, and you'll see it doesn't pop up. For things with like visors, you might want that, but most players don't want something obstructing their face like that. But that's more of a personal preference, honestly. But we have that guy working, and we have this guy working. Okay, so we're back in the editor here, and if I have the armor selected like this, I realized because I was about to jump into the other part of the tutorial, but I'm circling back so I don't forget to just show you that armor does work. I'm in the armor damage manager component for the vest here, and I have the collider on it, just like this. If I shoot, you can see that bullet holes pop up on it. So, like I mentioned earlier, you don't always have to put in the collider name here. It kind of depends on what you're putting in. For the vest, in this case, it actually did require that, and I think it's because I had the default item up there. So, with Infusion, you will need to tweak it a little bit. I've had armor that doesn't require any collider in here. This one specifically did, however. So, just play around with that a little bit. I didn't really expect that. But yeah, play around in here. Change the values a little bit, because right now with the health and all the damage negation, this is basically just a piece of paper. Like 9mm will rip right through it. So play around and make it a little bit balanced. Make it so bullets can actually penetrate it and things like that. Make it so people aren't completely invincible with your armor. But yeah, it's super easy. You just play with these values, go into Infusion. You can put it on like an AI or something, and see what happens when you shoot them. The last thing I need to do now is go into the inventory object, and we're going to rename this guy to tutorial vest. Put a space there. We'll delete that, hit enter, add to prefab. We now want to put these into faction boxes. If your map doesn't currently have a faction manager object somewhere in the world, you're going to need to make one. And you would only typically really have one if you've already had a game mode on it. So if you have been creating a map for people to play on, you've probably generated one without realizing it. If you're literally just trying to make a gear mod, what you're going to need to do is actually spawn in a faction manager. So here in the resource browser, type in faction manager, and we have the faction manager editor, and we're going to drag that into our world. It's not a physical object, it's like an empty thing right there, but if you scroll down when you're in the SCR faction manager, you can see a list of your factions, and it'll give you all the information on what they're allowed to use, what their keys are in order to get like AI spawns and things, and what like their encryption key or decryption key, I guess, would be for radios and things like that. What we're going to worry about only at the moment is getting these two objects into an arsenal. So to do that, we're going to scroll down. We're just going to put it into the Soviet box. We're going to make sure we select our entity catalog. We're going to go to where it says item, and we have our multi-lists in here, and we have all these options, and everything in here is what will show up in an arsenal for you. So we can go to clothing, and we're going to click on plus, and we're going to add the we're going to click on plus, and we're going to add the catalog inventory item right there. Hit plus, catalog inventory item, and we can see that they pop up right there. Sometimes they might pop down below. It just kind of depends where they want to go when you're actually inserting it. So just look for where it says no prefab. We're going to open both of them up, and we're going to find our armor that we created in our save clothing. Whoops. And we're going to drag the construction helmet in like that. We want to make sure it's enabled. And then for the entity data list, we want to make sure it's an arsenal item. And then for arsenal data, we can change it to something like headwear. This isn't the most important thing, But with the item types, if you're going to be restricting certain items in arsenals, for example, if you don't want a certain faction using like rifles, and by default these objects here might be listed as a rifle, what'll happen is the game knows to hide everything with the rifle item type, so it could hide some of the custom objects that you've made. So it's best practice to just go through here and make sure that you are getting the correct item type for the object you're putting in the arsenal. Next, we're going to drop the vest. Again, arsenal item. We're going to make it something like, let's say just vest and waist. And now we're good. So when we go into the map, we can spawn in an arsenal through GM mode, or we can just put an arsenal in from Infusion here. We're gonna pop our arsenal box right there, and what might happen is when you load it up, the arsenal box is gonna say there's nothing in it, and that might be because we need to create a subworld with a game mode on it. So to do that, we're gonna go to File at the top left-hand corner. We're gonna create New World. Go hit Save. We're gonna create a sub-scene of the current world. And then we're going to save it. Tutorial world, test world, and then we'll call it, let's say, testing world GM or something, because we need to add a game mode or else the arsenal doesn't know what it's doing. Hit OK. Now, when we have the testing world here selected, we're going to go to plugins, game mode setup. We're just going to leave it on Game Master just to be easy. Scan world, and it's going to say it needs to generate all of these things, so we can hit next, create entities, next, create header, yes to all. Just go through everything and just say yes to everything right there. Perfect. So now we have a testing world here with a GM mode and everything enabled, so the arsenals should work. And you'll see it actually opens up the GM mode just like this. We're going to go to our arsenal, and we can see the arsenal works. We're going to go all the way over, and you can see right here the tutorial vest and the construction helmet pop up in here. So if I were to remove my stuff, I have my objects in here, and they work exactly how they should. So that's about it. This is a long video. I was saying it'd be a short one, but making sure helmets and vests work, I guess, took a little bit longer than I was expecting it to. There's a real lack of tutorials and content on ARMA, and by no means would I consider myself a modder or an expert at all in this, but there are so many people who want to get into it, and for someone like myself who spent so much time trying to figure this out on my own and reading through documentation and just relying on trial and error and bothering other people about it, I think something like this can help people a lot. Maybe in the future I'll create a more in-depth tutorial on like how to make maps or something, because I know people like my couple little metro maps so far. But I hope this helps someone. I know it's long, but I hope people get some value out of it. Like I mentioned before, all of the files will be available in the description. If you have any questions or you would like to see some mod progress or just see what me and my community get up to, I'll have the link to my personal kind of like YouTube Discord called The Garden. It'll be in the description. And then there's also going to be the Metro Ascension Discord as well for people who would like to play on the Metro server. For anyone who would like to support the channel, there are some links as well down there for things like PayPal, but please, 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 please don't ever feel obligated to give anything there. People who just watch and give me such kind words is genuinely enough, but for people who want to support a little bit more, there's options down there for PayPal or for YouTube membership. And that's about it. So appreciate you for watching. I hope you got some value out of this. I hope you have a great morning, afternoon, good evening, wherever you're watching this from, and I'll talk to you later. See ya.